I see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Billy Griffith with Emerging Revolutionary War, coming to you tonight for our latest installment of our Rev War Revelry. We hope everybody has had a great weekend thus far, but tonight we want to welcome Doug Cubbison, who is the board president for the Braddock Road Preservation Association. We thought this was a good opportunity to bring Doug on and let him talk about the organization and what they do when it comes to interpreting and preserving this history. So, Doug, for those of our viewers who aren't familiar with you, tell us about yourself. What is your background?
Sure. Well, at this point, I'm now with the next I think, geez, next week, I will be 66 years at this point. Uh, I have actually from Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania. And a lot of you may not aware of, but a number of Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, a large number of young men, Walt Powell, Bruce Egley, for you might know Vince Watson, uh, Bruce Egley. We ended up, believe it or not, they in oh geez, I was not even involved that early. Maybe I was high school. They went to Fort Ligonier Museum in a reenactment in 1970, I believe it was 1970. And he'd actually wanted, he'd heard about a reenactment, and he thought, oh, wow, interesting of battle here at Fort Ligonier. Sounded interesting. So he actually saw some of the reenactors and said, this is really exciting things. How do I join about living history or reenactings? And one of the guys, Richard Cornwall, Richard, of course, from years now but fascinating Richard Cornwall from Nashville, Tennessee. And he actually had a truck full of equipment. And he said, well, if you want to be able to do this in a reenactment, well, we have some extra uniform and clothes. Just come on out and I'll show you how to shoot it. And honest, Walt Powell, Bruce Egley, and Bruce Egley actually had gone to a reenactor at Fort Ligonier Museum. And they got excited about this. I was a little bit younger, but they called me Walt, and I called Doug and said, one of my best friends, and Walt said, wow, this reenacting was great. You should go some reenactors. This is really exciting. They're doing French and Indian. Where should you try them? I said, oh, okay, that sounds like fun. And went from there at that point. But a lot of us from Northwest Pennsylvania, Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, a lot of these young men, we had history. We had a lot of the history, and a number of one of the things is that George Washington. You're familiar with George Washington. Well, when 1753 did the George Washington from French to is it Waterford at the fort there, and when we learned about George Washington, did that to actually right from Slippery Rock in 1753. He visited, and we got fascinated that George Washington came right by that trail where we learned about that. We became excited about George Washington and his history of French-Indian War here in 1753. And as a result of those things, that really became an interest in French and Indian War and American history. And a number of these people, we actually formed a Civil War living history reenactment group. Actually became a Brigade American Revolution BAR programs. We joined them, formed our own unit, and again, a lot of them just then obviously Walt got a PhD. I got myself and Bruce Egley all studied from history, and a number of us started to become books and just become fascinating in American history, and particularly in the 18th century in particular. Mm-hmm. So we had an interest in this, and again, when Walt felt that a number of his friends wanted to learn about French and Indian War, Braddock Campaign, in northwestern Pennsylvania. Like I said, he started Forum about Jumonville because of the Dunbar camp. And from then, we created the BRPA and created the actual organization there.
Okay. So you have been with BRPA since its conception.
Right. Walt Powell, like I said, Walt Powell formed the BRPA. Walt was the power with BRPA. Honest to God, he has been as the president for 37 years. I started to learn in about BRPA and about I got out of the United States Army, and I learned about 2001. So I started to fall accidentally with the BRPA. Started going to the BRPA seminars, and I started to do that about 2001.
Okay.
So I've been pretty active in that since so about 24 years at this point. So
okay, very good. Yeah, you mentioned Dr. Walt Powell. We're very familiar with Dr. Powell here. We have had him on several Sunday night revelries, one actually talking about George Washington and the French and Indian War, and then another on Benedict Arnold. But Walt was one of my professors when he was temporarily teaching at Shepherd while I was going through my undergrad. And was also a Gettysburg licensed battlefield guide, and I happen to actually have his badge, number 12, coincidentally. So we're talking about the Braddock Road Preservation Association. For those who aren't familiar with it, what is the BRPA? Give us a little history of the organizations you kind of already have, and what does it actually do now?
Well, basically, if we just give a little bit of French Indian War here, obviously, in 1753, the French had slowly begun moving into Ohio country, into Allegheny, and into Ohio country. And again, they initially wanted to the George Washington as a provide the diplomacy program, and was a diplomat with trying to convince the French, saying, well, this is our American English land. It doesn't belong to the French. Funny enough, the French had a different idea. And since they had a big army, they basically won the Ohio country with the Friends. So in 1754, they finished the complete. They actually grabbed at the Forks, Ohio in 1754, seized the fort, created what became Fort Duquesne, and became 1753 would become the Ohio country at that time as the French, the area. And here my squirrel's attacking me again.
French squirrels.
Yes, apparently I left some food, so apparently he is eating. He's loving it right now. But anyway, so George Washington ended up with Fort Necessity in 1754. Was they attempted with the Virginian colonists to attempt to Fort Duquesne. It failed as a disaster, and of course Fort Duquesne, and George Washington lost his fort and actually had to surrender to the French at Great Meadows in July of 1754. So because the colonies failed, they wanted to form in 1755 a British army. And they actually took Major General Edward Braddock was the English commander. And he actually he arrived here actually in February 1755. He brought in 2 regiments, the 44th and 48th Foot, Dunbar and Halkett colonels, 2 regiments from regiments. They arrived in Alexandria, and they had, although they began in 1754 from London, and actually began a program here to expedition to actually seize the French and from the French and Fort Duquesne. And unfortunately, their maps and understanding of most of the terrain is pretty amazing. They arrived at the Alexandria. The intent was they were going to follow the Potomac River all the way to Fort Cumberland. For those of you who've ever been to the port realized that you cannot actually take a river through there. So they actually realized they had to march all the way to Alexandria instead of by a river. The intent, you can imagine, the context of a few problems, as you can understand. And Braddock had a very a lot of problems too. And actually, what Ant's doing was, again, he actually took two regiments, both the regiments, one regiment through Maryland, one through Virginia, all the way up. They actually marched to Fort Cumberland, and they built the. Then they two regiments joined at the Fort Cumberland, today Cumberland, Maryland, and then they actually began a road by Braddock all the way. Basically, built a road from Fort Cumberland all the way to Forks, Ohio, to the Fort Clay. And what ends up happening, and they actually do really amazing. Well, I mean, they hold an entire road, which was really amazing how construction was done. And quite frankly, they should have won. Unfortunately, in July 13th in 1755, they ran themselves in the Monongahela, Turkle Creek, and the entire British Army. They had about 1,300 men. They lost about probably 1,000 men from the campaign. General Braddock was mortally wounded and ended up dying close, actually pretty close near Fort Necessity. Braddock, his grave was there. So basically, the Braddock is one of from the beginning of the real British Army and expedition here at 1755 from the French and Indians. It is the failure and defeat here in the Battle of Monongahela. And, this great loss was one of the great losses of the French Army. And, really the expedition at this point began the process and eventually created very quickly an actual French and Indian, what ends up become what becomes 1763, from 1766 all the way until 1763, basically international war.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Braddock Road, obviously the BRPA gets its namesake from the road that Braddock has built, but the Monongahela is not the only event that your organization focuses in on when it comes to interpreting, correct?
Right. Well, typically as we started the researching with the Braddock campaign, you really can't understand here in northwestern Pennsylvania without understanding of the Forbes Campaign of 1758. And the 1758 that the Americans had, we finally defeated what they wanted to defeat to the British Army in 1758. And they finally wanted to lead an expedition. Brigadier General John Forbes, Colonel Henry Bouquet, Colonel George Washington. They finally determined that they were going to defeat France here at Fort Duquesne at the French Forks. And by 1758, they actually built a whole road from Forbes Campaign, a large number of fortification to build the fort, and then again built new forts. They built a whole Forbes with the brand new fort, Carlisle entrenchment, Fort Loudon, Fort Littleton, Fort Belvoir, Fort Duarte, and then Fort Ligonier. And then eventually in November 1758, General Forbes would march on November 24th, 1758. They actually will destroy the French, and French became what became the American English. And of course, American then always from 1758 until, of course, the American Revolution is basically now the entire British territory.
Okay, so the BRPA, you mentioned Fort Ligonier, which there is a museum there. Do you partner with other history-centric organizations in the region too?
Well, yes, and obviously, what we've been working together is through the BRPA. So, and now actually, we've actually with the bus. So we've actually at this point researched most of the 1755 Braddock and 1758 Forbes campaign, and we have basically at this point everything from Fort Loudon all the way to Fort Duquesne, and of course from the Braddock campaign, Fort Cumberland, all the way to Fort Braddock. A lot of people are now aware that in Braddock Battlefield, Braddock Battleground now is actually a museum here at North Braddock, Pennsylvania. So there actually now is a Braddock Battlefield, and even in frankly even 15, 20 years ago, there was never a museum from the Braddock defeat. There was never anything. Literally, there was anything. I mean, I think there was like literally one historic medal that was shoved in the side of and literally almost wrecked. Today, now an entire Braddock battleground is a museum. So that actually is an amazing, significant one of the things that makes a huge difference here. That we've actually now understand and have an interpretive and educational for the museum here at Braddock Battleground. That's one of the most important things that we're very pleased with it. Obviously, we have met with Fort Necessity. We've had multiple Fort Necessity. And, one of the things is personally, I've actually created the Fort Necessity Historic Structural Report with the National Park Service at Fort Necessity in 1754. So we've actually created that now. And of course, Fort Ligonier is now Fort Ligonier Museum is basically an entire reproduction of Fort Ligonier. Also, the Fort Redoubt, the 1758 Redoubt, is now actually is one of the family, basically from a number of from the families who actually own a bunch of the families there. And now they actually have the Redoubt is you can actually visit the Redoubt, and it's actually in good condition. You can actually understand that there's preservation. The Redout's in pretty good condition. There's actually Forbes Campaign in very good condition there. So you now can understand a large between if you begin with Fort Necessity, Braddock Battlefield, Fort Ligonier, and the Fort Duarte. Now we can actually understand for the first time all the way to Fort Pitt, all the way understand these two campaigns.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And BRP is basically, part of our responsibility now is basically, and eventually we'll probably in the very near in the future, will become both the Braddock and the Forbes BRPA, if you will.
Okay.
Because now we recognize that the importance of Northwestern and those two campaigns, all from 1754, 1755, and 1758, all come here, either the Braddock Road or the Forbes Campaign. And of course, then if we begin in the history, obviously the National Road becomes Braddock, and Forbes ends up the two National Road that allows transportation from all the way from Virginia and Pennsylvania all into Northwestern, into basically what comes out of Northwest Ohio. And obviously then we will end up, we kind of ends our research basically all the way to the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794. But again, at the U.S. Army, the National United States Army, in the entire 1794, the National Redoubt goes from, once again, from Carlisle, right through the Forbes Road, and again, right from the Cumberland Road, right from the Braddock Road, comes right through exactly the Army, goes right through the same place in 1794.
Yeah,
so, really tells that story from from the whole way.
Yeah, one of the most important land thoroughfares on the North American continent early on. That's for sure. So when it comes to the French and Indian War, you mentioned that you kind of got your interest started with reenacting, and it's since obviously evolved. But what is your favorite aspect of the war to study, whether it's just a single campaign, an individual, and then also what is your favorite French and Indian War site to visit?
Well, I have to, obviously at this point, I have researched the Sir John St. Clair, who was the quartermaster in both Braddock and Forbes campaign. And I actually wrote the book on my very Colonel John St. Clair, one of my favorite human people that I'm absolutely fascinated. And actually, John St. Clair is always one of my best friends now. But I actually have written about a 1760 campaign. And then obviously I wrote, and most important to me, the 1758 campaign, the military history of 1758. And one of the things that I felt, though, although Braddock had received a lot of historians, a lot of receipt, taken a lot of history from the Braddock campaign, but for some reason, the historians were fascinated by the Braddock, but nobody had ever a military historian to understand the 1758. And one of the things I frankly became very upset, there was never a Forbes campaign. So at some point, apparently nobody else wanted it. I said, well, you know what? I'm going to do the 1758 campaign history. And I did the best I could with the history of the Forbes campaign. And frankly, I'm most fascinated with the entire French and Indian War because this is northwestern Pennsylvania. This is where I grew up. These are the places that I became. Like I said, 1758 as a very young man. I was maybe 10 years, 11, 12 years, just starting to learn about George Washington in 1753. And again, real understanding that the trail came right through Butler County, came right through there in 1753. And was fascinated that George Washington was here. And I started that fascinating again that become from the George Washington 1753. Yeah. And from there on, it went now. Eventually, it's created a lot of history and a lot of research. And I have to tell you, of my research, fascinating is still the Forbes campaign. I really believe that the Forbes campaign is absolutely fascinating. John Forbes, Henry Bouquet did a magnificent hold us right out, and basically was a Forbes campaign. I thought one of the finest military campaign ever really created. One, and so I'm fascinated with the Forbes campaign, and we are just barely started the Forbes campaign and the staff ride, and we're actually going to do a military staff ride for the Forbes campaign. We have myself, David Preston, my very close friend, David Preston and I are working on that together with, actually will become both the Braddock 1755 and the Forbes campaign 1758. It'll be a full staff ride to actually, so that our leadership, like Pennsylvania National Guard, the United States Army, Marines, strategic leadership, and how we can end up understanding how we can do strategic leadership here in staff riding here. And so we are just started that work. Hopefully, probably another year or two, we will do a staff ride on that. Complete that.
Right. Fantastic. Well, sure. Between you and David, that will certainly be a great program. So BRPA every year holds a annual seminar. Tell us a little bit about what that is and what it includes.
Well, again, the BRPA, and as I said initially, it was initially just some friends interested in the 7 Years' War and French and Indian War. Initially, a little honest to God, Walt, actually, a number of us just met together at Vaughnville we just had kind of a dinner or a lunch, and they met together and talked about it. And from there, it started a seminar. And today now, the BRPA, we do a two quality of seminars. Basically, the intent is to have the Friday. It's always the first Friday in November, every November. We always stick with the same boat. And we try to do a bus tour for one of the baths. And we actually either do Braddock Campaign or the Forbes Campaign. We actually do a bus tour to one of the battlefield sites and actually look at some of the battlefield. And what's interesting in November, we're actually going to do one for the Whiskey Rebellion. We'd never done a whiskey rebellion, so it's actually kind of a little new approach for the first time.
Yeah.
So we're going to be doing that, and then typically we have a bunch of scholars and academics, lectures and programs, and actually the lectures, very historic topics of some of the best authors and best historians talk about. At this point now, it's actually become the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. So basically, again, now we spend a bus tour to actually visit the battlefield, and then we actually learn about seminars through studying topic. And we do that typically on a Saturday, again, the first every November. So that's that will now become is now with a new location, and it will be at Fort Ligonier Museum. It's our home.
Great. So if one final question for you here. So if somebody wants to become involved with BRPA or even just attend the seminar, how could they go about doing that?
Well, the BRPA has, obviously, we have the web page, and of course there will be a program with we work with Fort Ligonier Museum, Ligonier, Pennsylvania. So basically, through Fort Ligonier or through BRPA, you can learn about this, and we typically we will have again the bus program. You don't have to do the bus if you don't want to, but if you're interested, we'll have a full bus, and then we will, again, with our a bunch of lectures and programs will be on that Saturday. So we will get that to everybody, and we have a very limited. I mean, we typically have plenty. A lot of space at the Fort Ligonier Conference. There's lots of space, but the bus tours actually does pretty quickly, fastly. We will normally ends up with everybody. Bus is completed, so we do very good with the bus. And typically we have about 100 seminars visit every seminar, and that will again in Saturday.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, Doug, I want to thank you for joining us tonight and giving us a rundown on what BRPA is and what the organization does. If anybody does have questions for Doug, about whether it's personal questions about his interest in this topic or about the organization, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will pass those questions on to him so you get answer. But for everybody, I want to say thank you for tuning in tonight. You can join us for our next Revelry, July 7th at 7 on our YouTube page, as we welcome Michael Norris. And he is the executive director of the Carpenters Hall in Philadelphia, and he will be discussing the First Continental Congress as we fast approach the 250th anniversary of that. So again, on behalf of Emerging Revolutionary War, I want to say thank you, Doug, and thank you to all of our viewers. Good night.